Good evening, everyone. Can I please start off by requesting everyone to kindly switch off their mobile phones? And we'll start off with the presentation of Angavastram to the dignitaries by the Borker family. Now, can I please invite Sia Jangir from Bluebells International School to recite a verse from the Bhagavad Gita. And I would also like to invite Vedant Bhattacharya, who will recite 2 verses from Gurudev's Gitanjali.
Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 2, verse 47. Karmanyavadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachan ma karma phal hetu bhu mate sangostva karmani. Your right is to work only, but never to the fruit thereof. Let not the fruit of action be your object, nor let your attachment be to inaction.
Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali, verse 35 and 36. Chitto jeta bhoy shunyo, uchcho jeta shir. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom my Father led my country awake. Tobo kache ei mor shesh nibedon. This is my prayer to thee, my Lord. Strike at the root of penury deep in my heart. Give me the strength lightly to bear my joy and sorrow. Give me the strength to make my love fruitful in service. Give me the strength never to disown the poor or bend my knees in front of an insolent might. Give me the strength to raise my mind high above the daily trifles, and give me the strength to surrender my strength to thy will with love. Thank you.
I would request the dignitaries on stage to come for the lighting of the lamp.
Now, may I please invite Professor Patricia Uberoi to give the introduction.
Good evening, everybody. I'm really honored to be here to give the introduction to this lecture and to say something about the speaker and also the chairperson, and to begin with the D.S. Borker Memorial Lecture and Mr. Borker himself. As possibly you've read, this lecture is in a memorial series on My Vision of India 2047. It's particularly apt this year on the 70th anniversary of Indian independence. The lecture is a civil society initiative instituted in 1999 and held every year since then. It was instituted by his sons, the late Shekhar Borker and Mr. Suhash Borker, who is right here, and has had a real galaxy of speakers, chairs, and discussants, among whom I'm happy to have seen my teachers, my colleagues, my students, and ever so many friends. This makes me very honored to be here. Mr. D.S. Borker, or DSB, or Nut, as he was known to his friends, was a civil servant, public sector administrator. He was known as a champion of the poor and the weak, and a man with a human approach and utmost simplicity. He was born in Bombay in August, 17th August, so we're in August now, 1911, and he had his early education in Bombay and went on to England for his further studies. Mr. Borker had varied interests, and one of the most interesting for me as a former Australian was his interest in physical education. In 1940, at a relatively young age, under 30 I suppose, he published a little book by Allen and Unwin in London called A Physical Education for India. This book is so rare that it's kept in the rarest section of the Bodleian Library of the University of Oxford, from where his family recently sourced it. In this book, he makes an appeal for for an innovative idea, what he called play streets, by which certain streets during specific hours of a day were to be closed down for vehicle traffic so as to enable children to play on the thoroughfares. Apparently, the experiment was some success in some cities in the UK. And not for children, but maybe for grown-ups as well. Perhaps we could say that Connaught Place on Sundays, Rajiv Chowk, is taking on that role. Unfortunately, though, it's never taken off in India. DSB's professional career spanned a great range of positions. On India's independence, he joined as the private secretary to N.V. Gadgil, a member of the Nehru's Union cabinet. Since we're remembering in the 70th anniversary of independence this year, we also remember the horrible events of partition. It is interesting to note that during the riots in Delhi in 1947, DSB actually saved the life of Mr. Hussain Imam, chairman of the Council of States, from a mob which was trying to kill him. And at great risk to his own life, he escorted him to the airport and out of immediate danger. This is a reminder of something that everyone has been thinking these days, that during these horrible events, many, many people owed their lives and their families' lives to the goodwill of people of the other community. This is exactly what he did. Later, he worked on the Planning Commission's plan of projects in public sector organizations like Hindustan Steel, State Trading Corporation, Fertilizers Corporation, and so on. Now, this series of lectures in his memory is intended to strengthen secular and democratic values and traditions and encourage the process of thinking of the kind of India we would like to see in 2047, 100 years after independence. It's unique in a way that it has consistently showcased ideas and forward-looking agendas, and often what the family have called contrarian ideas and agendas across a remarkable spectrum. As you will see from the list of the 18 persons of renown from various academic disciplines, various spheres of life, who've delivered this lecture in the past, there are many contrarians among them, long may they live, and plenty of argumentative Indians as well. Now we come to this lecture, the 19th in the series, delivered by Professor Bina Agarwal. Now, Bina Agarwal has been my friend, my colleague, and for many people in women's studies, the women's movement, and feminist circles around the global feminist circles, she has been a person to whom we have all looked up. She's Professor of Development, Economics and Environment at the Global Development Institute of the University of Manchester. And prior to this, she was Director and Professor of Economics at the Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi University, where she continues to be affiliated. It was in this capacity that I came to know her as a faculty member there for several years. She was educated in the universities of Cambridge and Delhi and has held distinguished research and teaching positions at many universities, including Harvard, Princeton, Michigan, Minnesota, New York University School of Law. She was Harvard's first Daniel Ingalls visiting professor and later research fellow at the Ash Institute, Kennedy School of Government. Now, Bina Agarwal's work covers both theory and empirical analysis. I think the lecture to come will show you exactly that, with a particular focus on the most disadvantaged of members of the populace and on gender issues in particular. She writes especially from a perspective of political economy, but on a large number of interconnected fields, as you will just about to see, including land rights, livelihoods, environmental governance, sustainable development, collective agriculture technology, and food security, as well as poverty and institutional transformation. She has particularly been a pioneer of work on gender inequality in property and land, and her very well-known work, A Field of One's Own, Gender and Land Rights in South Asia, has been a landmark book in this field. It has gained many, many awards, which I won't detail. Her subsequent work extends this point of view to deal with gender and green governance, on the impact of women's presence on forest governance and conservation, demonstrating positive outcomes on both counts. What she calls the difference that women can make. In 2016, just a short while ago, Oxford University Press also published a 3-volume compendium of her selected works entitled Gender Challenges. She's an original thinker as well as engaged in policy advocacy, and has spearheaded, in 2005, the campaign for the comprehensive amendment of the Hindu inheritance law to make it gender equal. I shall not go into detailing all the many, many, many awards that she has won, both for her books and for her work and standing in all the areas I've mentioned, but simply remind you that she is a Padma Shri for her contributions to education, and has recently been awarded a special Order of Agricultural Merit by the government of France. So without further ado, I introduce you to Bina Agarwal. I've had the privilege of seeing her talk, or a first peek, and know exactly what is in store. It's also my pleasure to introduce Professor Upendra Bakshi, again with the caveat that there is no need to introduce him. He is so well known. He's Professor of Law since 1996 at the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom, and has been Vice-Chancellor of Delhi University for several years, 1990 to 94, and Professor of Law for 23 years in the University of Delhi. He also was awarded the Padma Shri by the Government of India. He's taught in many universities abroad, including the University of Sydney, Duke University, New York University School of Law, University of Toronto, and many others. He has a special interest in his special interests in his teaching and in his research and writing include comparative constitutionalism, social theory, human rights, corporate governance, business contact, and what he now likes to call, this is a mystery, the materiality of globalization. In fact, he is an all-rounder. But for many of us, he is famed for one particular intervention into public discourse and into policy making. Along with, and one wonders why the Google website doesn't mention this actually, along with two other Delhi University professors, Professor Kelkar and Professor Lotika Sarkar, as well as Professor Vasudha Dagamva, he was responsible for writing an open letter to the Chief Justice on what came to be called the Mathura rape case. It created enormous public debate. It fired the developing women's movement and feminist discourse in India, and it forced the government to change the rape law. For this, he has been a hero for many, many years to all followers within the women's movement. And no better chairperson could have been found for Bina's lecture on this occasion. So with this, I hand over to Professor Bakshi as chairperson and to Bina as speaker. Thank you.
I wasn't sure when I was to get up. Professor Upendra Bakshi, Patricia Uberoi, Suhash Borker, the entire Mrs. Borker, the entire Borker family. I'm really honored to be asked to deliver the 19th Borker Memorial Lecture, and thank you for inviting me. I thank Patricia for a very warm and generous introduction to my work. Now, Mr. Dwarkanath Borker was clearly a remarkable man, and one of the rare breed of civil servants we seldom see today. So I was especially struck by this idea, which Pat also talked about, of converting some city streets into play streets for children for part of the day. Now, it also reminded me of my own late father, S.M. Agarwal, who was also a civil servant, although in the telecom sector, and he also loved sports. So in fact, he organized independent India's first All India sports meet in 1951 when he was 30 years old. So Mr. Borker and my father, both sports lovers, may even have met, or at least I would like to think so. Now, it is not easy to envision. This is this grand topic of India in 2047, which is 100 years after India's independence. Now, I was born after 1947 and likely will pass away before 2047. But to imagine what we would like India to be in 2047 and to make that happen, we need a vision today and work for its realization. So each of you will no doubt imagine that future differently. But I hope there is some congruence with the ideas I will share today, because clearly this has to be a project we'd all take forward jointly. I've paid particular attention to some of the pictures, so you might hear my voice and look at the slides. Now, 1947 was born out of extreme violence and social turmoil. Since then, we've had both peace and conflict. But if we want 2047 to be a year of peace and cooperation among people and communities, we will need an alternative vision and work to realize it. So what would I like? I would like to see a transformation of the four main institutions in which our economic, social, and political life is embedded. This is the family, the workplace, the community, and the state. Now, all four institutions, as we experience them today, are deeply unequal, socially and economically, often violent, and typically driven by self-interest rather than by other regardedness. Can these institutions become more equal, more just, more caring, more tolerant, more free? On so overarching a canvas, I can only make broad brushstrokes, leaving you to fill the details. And I will focus particularly on gender inequality intersecting with other inequalities such as class and caste. So you'll ask, well, why privilege gender? Because on the one hand, probing gender inequality reveals the most complex layers of injustices which are hidden within families and within society, layers which cut across caste, tribe, and religion. On the other hand, some of the most innovative efforts to transform institutions, especially rural institutions today, have emerged from a gender focus. So let's first consider the family. Now, most people think of families as altruistic, as caring, as the heart of the heartless world, quite unlike markets, which are seen as dominated by narrow self-interest. Now, in an idealized view of the family, you see that picture, it's an idealized view of the family. Resources and tasks are assumed to be shared equitably, incomes pooled, preferences held in common, and decisions made jointly, or by an altruistic household head. So conflicts either do not surface or are resolved easily. Now, Gary Becker, who was the 1992 Nobel laureate for economics, formalized this idea in his unitary household model. Yet all of us know that this is not how real families behave. The preferences and interests of household members often diverge widely, and far from being equal, households are riven with gender inequalities. Now, these inequalities are revealed most starkly in female adverse sex ratios, undermining a girl's basic right to life, even 70 years after independence. In fact, of course, the most adverse sex ratios are found in our most prosperous states, which is Haryana and Punjab. In 2011, Haryana had 877 females per 1,000 males. Kerala had more than 1,000. But even where the girl child survives, she typically faces worse outcomes than boys in nutrition, health, education, skills, and property access. So if you see just these images, this, for instance, the little girl is sitting, the boy is older, he's being fed. Moreover, 27% of girls are married before they are 18, and many become mothers before adulthood. Women and girls also work longer and the most onerous tasks, being mainly or even solely responsible for childcare and elder care. So even if you take middle class homes, as many of us come from, and we sometimes have hired help, the responsibility to get these tasks done rests with women. Women are also greatly restricted in their mobility, both by social norms and by lack of safety in public places. But home is not necessarily a safe haven. There's a large number who experience spousal violence on a daily basis, and as life expectancy increases, they might also face elder abuse. So there's really rather little to suggest that families are spaces of pure altruism. Wouldn't you say that a more accurate depiction of family relations would be relations marked by both cooperation and conflict, driven by both altruism and self-interest, in which who gets what and who does what could depend on a person's relative bargaining power. Now, when you mention the word bargaining, intra-household bargaining, in relation to a family, many people balk because it's contrary to their idea of an idealized view of the family. So let me emphasize that recognizing the importance of bargaining power within families does not imply that there is explicit bargaining over everything, although there may be over some issues. Bargaining power is often implicit, as in social norms that define domestic work as women's work, or in social perceptions that women's economic contributions are less and so they deserve less. Now, such norms are often accepted as part of the natural order, or what the French sociologist Bourdieu called doxa, that which is admitted without argument or scrutiny. Such norms give men greater bargaining power even without explicitly having to bargain. So clearly, Indian families need transforming. Can we change them so that their gender relations are marked by love and respect, by equal sharing of resources and domestic work, by women having a full say in decisions of the household, freedom of mobility, and most of all, freedom from domestic violence? Now, of these many aspects that need changing, let me focus on two which both affect and reflect women's bargaining power within families. One is ownership of immovable property, and the other is sharing of care work. Now, women who own land or a house, you will agree, clearly are more economically secure. So, for instance, agricultural land is a very important, perhaps the most important source of livelihood for 65 to 70% of India's population, which is rural. But also we find that, of course, where mothers have assets, child survival, nutrition, and educational outcomes are significantly better. Most importantly, owning immovable property can protect them from domestic violence. So, a colleague and I studied 500 randomly selected households in rural and urban Kerala. And Kerala is interesting because, as you know, Kerala is supposed to be the female-friendly state. And we found that spousal violence, the incidence was 49% if they had no house and land, 7% only if they had house and land, 18% if they had land only, and 10% if they had house only. Owning immovable property gives women an exit option which husbands recognize, and few want to lose a propertied spouse. Now, in contrast to this, many studies and ours finds that employment alone does not protect women. So you might say, well, if a woman is employed, that's fine. But in fact, if you look at these figures, just imagine if a woman is in seasonal and irregular employment, and that is a vast majority of women in the informal sector, then she ends up, 49% of them end up facing physical violence. And what is also interesting is the wife is better employed than the husband, than 69%. So what it means is that simply being employed actually could put you more at risk of violence. And so this idea that, which is not to say that employment isn't important, but the important thing is that employment is not enough. Now, in the 1940s, actually, if you see some of these, I fished out these pictures from all over. The most important demand by women's organizations, and many of these organizations, as you see, go pre-independence, who lobbied for education and the right to vote, but also particularly for equal rights in property. And it is precisely because ownership of property is so foundational for women's autonomy that there remains such a strong opposition to it. Now, during the 1951 Constituent Assembly debates, and there are some of you would be familiar with that, legislators argued that giving women property would break up marriages. In fact, women may choose not to marry at all. So as one legislator said, may God save us from an army of unmarried women. So did it change? Well, 40 years later, many legislatures still held this view. So in 1989, the then Minister of Agriculture said to me, and it was a planning commission seminar where there were 50 people and there were 2 ministers. So the agricultural minister said to me after my presentation on women's rights in land, What do you women want? To break up the family? So ironically, of course, unintendedly, these remarks imply that the entire edifice of marriage is based on gender inequality, and this edifice would crumble the moment women own property. Yet such fears are seldom expressed for women's employment. Why not? Because property does provide women independence in a way that simply having a job does not. So you'll ask, well, would marriages really get destabilized if women owned property? Possibly in their current form, but they would be recreated on a more equal basis and as happier places. So, can women achieve gender equality in property by 2047? Legally, of course, most Indian women, Hindus, Christians, Parsis, already have equal rights in immovable property as men. In 2005, the 1956 Hindu Succession Act was amended. I did play some part in that. And the amendment led to 4 major changes, which could transform family relations. First, it gives daughters equal rights as sons in agricultural land. And believe me, this agricultural land, being such an important form of property, had produced huge resistance even when the Hindu Code Bill was being discussed. Secondly, women have equal rights by birth in co-parsonary joint family property, which means that it is a right by birth and it cannot be willed away by fathers. Third, a married daughter, and this is remarkable, a married daughter can return and reside in the parental home. She can even ask for partition, and she can be a karta. And fourth, the amendments apply across India, superseding state-level laws. Now, this idea that a married woman today has a legal right to return to her parental home, to inherit land, and to manage joint family property is not a small idea. It is a transformational idea, especially in North India, where daughters are still married to strangers in distant villages, and they are seen as belonging to the husband's family and rarely welcomed back. Now, this right of residence outside her marital home also provides a woman facing domestic violence an escape route. And this is something, of course, that can be exploited by the women's movement if they worked with the Domestic Violence Act and the Hindu Succession 2005 Act as complementary. Notwithstanding all of this, there are hurdles. So, for instance, the whole business of legal reform still remains partial. Muslim women and tribal women are still governed by unequal laws. Muslim women are governed by the 1937 Shariat Act, which remains unamended, and the latter, that is tribal women, by tribal laws, which remain uncodified. Now, in late 2005, I drafted a petition. I'd been involved in the amendment of the Hindu Succession Act, and once that was passed by Parliament on 29th August 2005 and then ratified by the President of India, I thought, well, how about having a go at least partially amending the 1937 Shariat Act. So I drafted a petition and a bill removing the discriminatory clause on land in the 1937 Shariat Act. It was signed by 420 persons and 46 organizations, including several hundred Muslim women and reformers, and strongly supported by the Muslim Personal Law Board. It got wide support since the amendment was still within the Shariat, but it would make a huge difference economic difference to women. Now, I submitted this petition and bill personally to the then PM, but the PMO wrote back to me saying, I quote, "It is the consistent policy of the central government not to interfere with the personal law of the country until the proposal comes from a sizable proportion of society." Now, what sizable portion means is anybody's guess. Just 5 months earlier, the same central government had amended the Hindu Succession Act, a process which had been catalyzed by a similar petition. So clearly, for an illusionary political risk, just an illusion, an opportunity was lost. That was 2005, and we are here 12 years later. Still, I am hopeful that by 2047, With civil society pressure, these laws can be made gender equal. We may even have a single gender equal civil code.